credentials.
Yeah. So
A, I'm black.
Hey, man. Right. That's a good beginning.
Unapologetically. B, I'm very curious.
All right.
So what that means is my curiosity sometimes gets the best of me, and I want to go see things for myself. And so I've God has blessed me with the gift of gab, so to speak. So I've been able to use my words to travel. So they've taken me all over the world with my poetry, motivational speaking, lectures, taken me all over the world to nearly 30 countries. I've been in 28 countries around the world doing this, about 40 states here in the United States. So I've been to Puerto Rico. I don't know if that's considered a country or a state or somewhere in between. Cuba, doing this. 13 countries in Africa on the soil. Been to Europe, haven't been to Asia or South America, but 30 countries on, a couple of different continents. So, any questions before, we get going?
I would just like to say, just bring on more info. We're hungry for it. I'll be kind of going in and out. Got more activities today.
Right.
Great.
I'm also a teacher. So when you mention the kids are not getting into school, you're absolutely right. So, so much so that, I was helping out with a social studies teacher last week, and he was talking about Africa. So he said, hey, can you come in and sit in with me, talk about Africa? So I thought that was a white guy teaching 3 years, and he knows everything. So the way he was teaching about Africa was he said, the main text was, Africa had slaves too.
Oh, Lord.
Africans enslaved Africans. And he really hyper-focused on that. And it's really unfortunate, Now, that might be true, but there's no system of slavery like the one that people that look like him perpetrated for centuries. And the results of it we're still going through to this day. So it was so much so that, it convicted me. Sounds like, so what am I teaching? What am I doing in this school? And where's, my best area of influence that can be in the school? So, I've written 7 books. So naturally for me to, do a creative writing class or an English class. But I was really seriously about teaching social studies. And it really, when that words, sort of, these are middle school kids. So when that kind of went into my spirit, I was like, where can I be most effective at how to teach our history to our children in a way that isn't skewed by some superiority complex that they might not even be aware of themselves. So, you're right. They're not teaching it in schools the right way. They're teaching them something. But sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And so I quickly forgave him for his curriculum because he just didn't know. He doesn't know how vast Africa was. And then he put on there Portugal, Spain, Africa. I was like, wow, that's a big country. Portugal's a real tiny country. It's about the size of, Indiana and Ohio, right? Mm-hmm. Africa is not a country. Yeah. Africa is one big continent. And as we learned here last week, it is 12 million square miles. That's over 30 million kilometers, right? It is a vast and beautiful and wonderful land. And, I've been to 13 countries. I haven't been anywhere. So I've been mainly west. I've been some in the east. I haven't been south. It's so diverse. It's so beautiful and so wonderful that you cannot clump it together and just say, Africa, right? Even what I have on today, is that African? No. What I have on came from Ghana, right? You see the difference? Is that European? No, this is French. You see, that's a different connotation it's a different skew in your brain when you think of France and then Europe, right? Because when you think of Europe, you're like, oh, well, they speak Spanish there. They speak Italian. They speak Greek. They speak a whole lot of things, but not just Spanish from Spain, right? So we have to reorient our mind, and we call things just African. Are you African? Right? There's a particular region, place, and we learned that there was 7 distinct types of human beings from African descent that populate the entire population of 7 billion people, right? And as our professor really stated out, that not only can 2 black people make a white child, but 2 white people can't do nothing but make a white child. So we have the whole color spectrum because that's the origin of where we're from, that continent. So we have within us to do anything and to create everything. So just keep that in mind. So what we're going to do today, we're going to do some self-reflection, okay? We're going to see how have I been affected, how can I effect our history and our future, and what are my personal thoughts about what it means to study this type of thing. How does it reorient our perspective? Okay, because perspective, that's our superpower. How we see things either is to our construction or to our destruction. Because if you have the right perspective, you can do anything. And think about it. I thought about it this way. Who was our first black president? Recognized black president? That's because that's a perspective from our destruction. It wasn't because he was cool. It was because he played the sax and smoked weed, and they said, well, he's black. That was the narrative back in the 90s, and that's a sort of a destructive mentality. So when we think of a 44th president, I'll be more specific.
Yeah.
All right. What's special about him? Anybody?
He's got melanin.
He's got melanin. Okay. Everybody has melanin. He just had more than the rest. Right. I want to say we are recording this, so you got to speak a little louder. That's where you want to do. Don't worry about the cameras, anything else. Just worry about this little thing right here. Okay. So speak loudly when I ask you to share. So, what's special about Barack Obama from your perspective?
He is accomplished.
Okay.
He has a sense of self.
Sense of self, okay.
I think it was special because he could easily have gone in a different direction given his upbringing and his family. And I think he embraced his blackness.
His family. There's a lot of people raised by white folks that have been successful. 44 of the 45 presidents was raised by white folks.
No, I'm saying
he was raised by white folks.
I'm saying that because he was raised by white folks, he could have taken a very much of a Eurocentric perspective on himself and who he was. And I don't think he's done that.
All right. Everybody's going to share in my class.
When I think of him, I think he was just whole to me. Like, he was a family man. He was intellectual. He was grounded. He was principled. He was just a moral man of integrity. That's kind of what initially comes to mind.
That makes him special?
I think nowadays that makes him very special.
In comparison
especially
to
in politics.
Yes. I think to other politicians especially who have been in that position.
Okay. All right. Not like Uncle Thomas.
Yeah.
No, he was not Uncle Thomas.
I'm talking about Clarence, Uncle Clarence Thomas,
Mm-hmm.
who was accomplished.
Mm-hmm.
He's achieved, in the realm of politics. He's gotten to the highest form of his field, right? There's something different about him than Barack Obama from my perspective, but I want to hear yours.
Because he thinks he got everything by himself.
This is
Clarence Thomas. Yeah, and that we should be able to pull ourselves up by our and do what he did, but he did not get everything by himself. He still got where he was on the shoulders of those that came before him.
Okay.
And that's a Eurocentric perspective.
Right. That's a big difference between him and President Obama.
Okay. Mr. Dixon.
I've been thinking, I couldn't think of anything particular other than he went to school, he went the right way, he become a lawyer, so he got the law down pat where he could understand what the ramifications were. the law is what we go by here in the United States. Whether the law is right or wrong, the law is on the books. Once it's on the books, you can use that to the good or the bad. So he used the law in order for him to get stuff that he really needed to get done. And he realized that as long as you're in the system, you got to work the system. And I'm glad that he did what he did without creating waves, unlike the new president. So.
Oh, he created waves.
Yeah, I mean, created, major waves. Yeah, he did stuff that actually upset some people because he's trying to help his own people.
Upset him so bad we got 45.
In some way, well, it actually backfired on them. They're going to have to deal with this effect they have now. So I like President Obama because he decided, regardless of the consequences, that he was going to try to help his people.
Okay, beautiful. Sister?
Family.
Okay.
You
Explain.
No, tell them to take it off me.
Oh. Actually, we're going to go from this side. She doesn't want to be filmed. She has not signed the waiver. She doesn't want. And we can eliminate you.
Okay, thank you. How he brought his mother-in-law with him, and and he focused on her, and and the children and all that, and I admired him for that.
Okay. So family. So George Bush had a family.
Well,
brought his daughters.
Yeah.
Brought his mama and his daddy.
Nah, they were there before her. That's a different story.
And nobody's perspective is incorrect. Okay? So that's not what I'm saying. I'm not challenging you for right or wrong. I'm just saying that's your perspective. And your perspective is your superpower because that is the lens in how we see the world and how we navigate in the world. Sister?
I voted for Barack Obama for both terms and believed that he was a better candidate and that he represented a legacy of struggle and history for us. I liked his identification with his Kenyan father. I disagree with him on a lot of things. I thought that he pushed some envelopes, and for that, I feel pleased about some of what he did. I think he compromised way too many times, but so those are my reflections.
Okay. Brother Jabu.
Hey.
Wait. Anybody else? I want you to go last.
Yeah.
So my perspective is very much in line with Dr. Thompson's here. I really like that Barack Obama's heritage, Kenyan heritage, really gave voice to a different type of immigration experience. So often in the United States, when we say immigrant, we're really referring to Mexican and South American, where African immigrants are completely lost in the conversation. And although Barack was not an immigrant, his father was, and that became such a political issue. At the same time, though, it brought a different type of immigration experience to our collective awareness. I voted for him both times. I too feel like he compromised way too many times. And certainly there were gains for our people, but I also think that there could have been more gains for our people. But in regards to the major thing that I really appreciated about him initially, it would be his Kenyan heritage and then how that was able to be brought to the forefront and how he never seemed to shy away from that, even though his relationship with his father was somewhat disharmonious at different points. I appreciate that he did not whitewash his Kenyan heritage.
Beautiful. Sister First Lady.
Yes, she mentioned family, and you said Bush brought his family. And I just wanted to add that he didn't bring a black family. Okay,
He had daughters just like Bush had daughters.
He's the only one that brought a black family.
Yeah. His daughters weren't, arrested for being drunk. And,
But I really like the way that he related relates to people, related to all people, that he was professional in that manner, that he didn't name calling and such. And sure, a lot of other presidents didn't either, but I really appreciate that, I guess, now compared to the next one that we got. I mean, I think that stands out for him more since then. And I also like the way that he embraced his culture. He didn't really get to do that in office, but I think it was so strong as he came into office that I appreciate that it has affected his life like that. So that's what I like.
And I'm
Ma'am?
so sorry, y'all. I went and got some adapters, that way y'all can plug it up over there.
Plug, I don't know who you plug.
Okay, and sorry.
Thank you.
Ma'am, what was special about our 44th president, from your perspective?
Oh, I love him. I like the way that you didn't hear. I know people look for things about them, negative stuff, but I love the example of family that they shown. I love it that they had the mother-in-law in the White House with them to take care of the children. The way the girls, the way the mother had them dressed, just everything. I thought it was an excellent example for all people, especially our people, to see.
Amen. Brother Jabu.
Yes.
Your turn.
My turn.
From your perspective.
Mine. What made Barack Obama special? Is that the question?
Yes, sir.
From my perspective, what made Barack Obama special was that they were able to use his African heritage to get away with things that were to our detriment, that we didn't holler about because of his African perspective. If he'd have been a white boy and said, okay, one of the first things he done was he didn't go to the racism conference in South Africa. And he says, I'm not going to the racism conference in South Africa because they might call Israel racist. So you deny us, people of African descent, the opportunity to hear this country's voice against racism at the International Racism Conference, because you think more about Israel than you think about us. A white boy wouldn't have been able to do that. But because it was Barack, we say, give him a chance. And I voted for Barack twice. And I voted for him, and I was upset the first time, but people said, well, he's got to get, he won't be able to do anything until the second election, when the second term, that's when he'll really be able to do something for us. But he's got to get reelected, and so I bought into that. I said, okay, I'm gonna give I know brothers in a tough ball game here, so I'm gonna give him that opportunity, and so I waited. So the second time I voted, even though I had issues, he went into Africa. He started more wars in Africa than any other president of this country. And we said, okay, it's a black man. We can't fight. We can't say something negative against him. But if your brother comes home and kills your family, do you support him because he's your brother?
Yes. If that's not a rhetorical question.
No. You support his behavior
You don't support his behavior.
Well, that's what I'm talking about.
You support his
Yeah,
humanity.
I saw with your question, I had to be a little more clear. Yeah, you can support him, but you cannot support that behavior.
Sure.
Correct.
And so what I saw was unique, and I think it was by design. The more I look back on it, it was by design that they decided to support Barack to become president over Hillary, because both of that was going to be a historical development. But the way that the world was moving, they said we need a person of color, we need a person of African descent, because they knew that they was going to be moving into Africa, and they knew that it would be easier and stop a possible worldwide rebellion of people of African descent if they used a black man to do it. So,
what's the largest company in the world?
Company?
Company.
ExxonMobil.
Well, they say it's Apple.
What? No.
What did you say?
ExxonMobil.
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 Probably most profitable is Apple.
I think that guy got the most money. I don't think that.
We'll look it up in a second, but
Okay.
Apple is one of the largest companies
we
in
can
the
go
world.
with that. Let's go with that.
And in Central Africa, every time you know, the batteries that you make for cell phones, all those minerals are being mined in Central Africa right now. So the most destabilized places on Earth are the places with the richest minerals. And yes, that's by design. Let me give my perspective real quick about our 44th president. The thing that hit me the other day, you know, and I want you to go last because you mirror this sentiment in many ways. He's the only black person that's made it that far, or far enough, without a slave name.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I mean, we can say Clarence Thomas on the Supreme Court, but that traces back to some
Right.
Yeah, that's
slave.
an excellent point.
So that empowered me. You know, when I talk to kids, it's like he doesn't own a slave name. He has a name from the original people where he came from. And that's East Africa, the eastern region of Africa. You know, we recognize as Kenya. And for me, that's important.
Yeah.
I was like, you know,
Yeah.
because you can't hold that, you know, you can't trace, I mean, not on his father's side at least, you can't trace his name back to a slave owner, right? Now, if you go to the social studies class, 7th grade, last week, they would have told you yes, because Africans also had slaves, right? And that was, you know, kind of demoralizing. How do you uplift them? In Black History Month, you're going to say that we're going to talk about Africa, and guess what? People look like you had slaves too, right? So that's what empowers me so much. It's like he don't have that. You know, I'm a slack. You know, and you know, in my families we're proud of that. You know, just because that's our family. But still, that I don't know who that original slack was. Now there's a legend that my grandfather killed a man. You know, this is sort of a, you know, we got family legends and family secrets and family myths. This is one of those. Family lies.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Them too.
I don't know, never met my grandfather. But my great-grandfather, my father's grandfather, apparently his wife was raped by a white man. He found that white man and murdered him. They found his wife and murdered her. He escaped with a pair of slacks. And they was expecting him to come one way. He was just, you know, played the food until he got far enough and started another family. So he called himself Slack. I don't know if that's true. If it is, I'm descended from a a superhero or whatever. I don't know.
Depending on whose perspective.
Whose perspective you got. You want to say something, sis?
Oh, I was just thinking about you were talking about his name, and as you were talking, I was beginning to see those pictures that were unveiled that go in the White House.
Yes.
And at first I didn't like them, but as you talked, I started to like them. Because he's got him sitting in the trees. I'm like, oh, I put him sitting in a tree. But that sort of makes it kind of special as I think about that.
Right.
And her in this African dress. I like that now.
Now, you guys know the meaning of the portrait, right?
No, I'm not familiar with the portrait of which you speak.
Oh, yeah.
We're gonna find that. Mr. Payne?
What is the meaning?
As I understand it, he's sitting in, one of the flowers is a flower that only grows in Kenya.
Mm-hmm.
One of the flowers is the city flower of Chicago, where he got his political career. And I think the other one is Hawaiian.
Yeah.
I just saw that.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So,
Is this
No other-
this is the
this is the official
portrait?
the
Yeah.
official
Oh,
presidential
I just saw that.
portrait
Okay.
that has been unveiled by the Smithsonian. It'll sit in the
Yeah.
Smithsonian forever and
Okay,
ever.
and they just done that last week or so?
Last week.
Yeah.
Oh,
It was
okay,
on
I
the
saw it,
news,
but
yeah.
I saw it, but I don't know.
So it's Hawaii.
You speak. Okay.
Right.
It's Chicago.
Yeah.
It's Kenya.
Okay.
So he's sitting in, probably that. So,
Oh yeah, I saw that. I saw that.
You want to pass it
oh,
around?
you got it. We can put it on the screen.
Oh, yeah, that'd be easier.
We can put it on the screen. So, when I think of that name, names are important. I break up a fight every single day. Somebody calling them names. Somebody getting called names. Oh, you bum, or you gay, or you this and that. They're just names. And then there's a little girl named Kim. I say, Tasha. Did that really hurt your feelings? It's just like, my name's not Tasha. I'll say, see how you responded? You let me know that that's not your name. Right? Stop responding to stuff that's not your name. And, the reason I want you to go last, because you embody that. Tell me your original name.
Hi,
We ain't gonna look you up.
Paul West.
Paul West Jr.
Dang, you done done your Yes, that's correct.
That was a slave
I
name
was-
passed on to us.
My daddy's name was Paul West.
Paul West.
That's
Right. What made you change yours?
Coming into understanding that it was a slave name, and I went through a lot with my mama because my father was gone when I changed my name, and I changed my name. What was that? 1979, and my mama said, "What are you doing? You denouncing the family?" I said, "No, Mama. I just ran into some information that says that name emanates from our time in slavery, and I just don't want to keep carrying that on." And so my mama started calling me a jabu and making my siblings and everybody else, because she understood. And then she shared with me that it was a story, legend in her family, that her grandfather used to brag that he was born one day after slavery ended. And so he says, "I never was a slave," and that was part of the legend of the family on her side. And so
Was
when
it born in
changed-
June or January? No, I'm just kidding.
I don't know. I can't tell you the date. All I can do is tell you the story, and I'd have to look up the specifics
date, right.
to make it happen. But it caused a pride in her, to whereas that she understood that I was not denouncing our family, but I was embracing our history. And when she died on her deathbed, with me standing right there by her, Jabu, I'm getting ready to get out of here. So yeah,
That gave you a different perspective. That gave you a sense of self. That gave you a sense of ownership of yourself and not
the
ownership
information
being
that
owned.
you're sharing, that I took back to my family, caused my family to start embracing our African heritage which is still done today.
It's beautiful. All right. So the name.
Strictly the name.
That's important. I'm gonna play our first video. You can find the chord.
You making me tell my history. Wow.
So I'm gonna play the first video that we have. Yes. He's gonna set that up right quick. So here's the instructions though. Everyone needs a piece of paper. Treat you like one of my students. Everyone get a paper. And I do have pencils if you want to.
I think we got it on this again. I didn't.
Yeah.
Who came to my class unprepared without a pencil?
I did. Thank you.
You have to answer his question.
So where do you teach?
Right now, I teach at the old school 72 in Madonna.
Oh, okay, okay. Have you been there long?
No, I've been there long. I was working for the federal government, and then
Oh, you're not working for them anymore?
no.
Oh.
Woke up one day, my wife said, "You don't want to work here." We work together. Then you don't want to work here. Go do what you were. I was teaching for total of 15 years, but 12 years in New York. Then I moved overseas and started teaching in Ghana. Came back here, taught, for 2 years at KIP. If you know KIP, around the corner. And then went to the federal government. Been there the last 9 years. My wife said, "You're unhappy here?" And she gave me 3 distinct reasons why I should go back to teaching. She said, "Look, you're unhappy, which makes you unbearable."
Makes you hard in the house.
2, Hatch Act is preventing you from doing anything political, and you're using that as an excuse. Because, if you want to, I can't run for any office being part of the federal government. At least the part I have something. And then 3, that's what I was made for. So with her encouragement, I applied, got a couple offers. I like teaching high school. I like teaching people that respond, and I can hold them accountable for being an adult. I had an offer from Manual High School in Madonna, so I took the middle school. So I was like, let me try middle school because I'll have more time to work with them. There's a finality that's, there's a sense of urgency when you're dealing with high school. Especially if you're teaching sophomore, humanities. It's hard to, you only got so long to deal with them before they're off in the world. It's a different sort of thing. So I'm at Madonna. School 72, Madonna Middle School. So.
He had a whole lot of problems over there.
Yeah.
Not too far from Manual. It's right off of Raymond. Get off 65 in Raymond. Go down, you'll see it off of Shelby. So that's my life. So let's talk about yours. So here's what we're going to do on your paper. Identify about 7 things that speak to you, that resonate with you. Yes, there will be a writing component to this at the end.
Yeah. 7.
A write and share.
Based on the lecture. Whatever,
even if it's something totally unrelated. You're like, oh man, but it jars your memory,
Okay,
Watch the video.
Watch the video, then make the 7 things, is what you said.
Correct.
Okay.
Oh, okay. That's
Okay. I just want to be clear what I do.
thanks for clearing that.
I'm not a good student.
We're not good. I would say that might have been a good fallacy.
No, I'm kidding. But
Don't kick us out the club.
Exactly. There you go.
My name is Molefi Kete Asante. I'm professor and chair of the Department of African American Studies. Actually, we are now the Department of Africology and African American Studies at Temple University. I am also the founding editor of the Journal of Black Studies. My field of interest over the last 30 years has been Afrocentric education, Afrocentric concepts, ideas, and philosophy. Let me start by telling you why this is important and also the origin of this idea. African people were brought to the Americas, and in the United States, African people were here from 1619, actually before it was the United States of America. We were here from 1619 as indentured servants and then as enslaved people until 1865. We were enslaved, consequently, 246 years. We have only been free, technically, for 151 years. So we were enslaved almost 100 years longer than we have been free. But during the period of our enslavement, African people were dislocated psychologically, dislocated economically, dislocated culturally, dislocated linguistically. We were, in effect, moved completely off of our own terms. And by being moved off of our own terms, we were decentered. The narratives of our lives were not our narratives. They were the narratives of Europeans. They were the narratives of white people. We participated in those narratives because our own narratives have been basically destroyed, decentered, dislocated, confused. And so consequently, the effect of this is confusion for the African population. Not only confusion for the African population, but after 1865, there were no people who came together and said, okay, perhaps black people, the 4 million Africans who are free, maybe there should be some process by which we look at what has happened, a debriefing of the 246 years, some possible way of examining what has happened to African people in terms of culture, in terms of history, in terms of psychology, in terms of spirituality. What's been the result of 246 years of this dislocation? So since we were not debriefed, and since we didn't have any one to process this for us, what happened was a degree of insanity. And in my judgment, this degree of insanity was best seen in the educational system, because the educational system was not designed for African people. The educational system in America was designed for white people. And it was designed essentially to create a situation where those who bought into it bought into a European system of education. That is why African people, I think, have a sense of loss of consciousness or lack of consciousness. That is why sometimes you see confusion where African people have no understanding of their own history. That is why we see ourselves often on the margins of European history and culture, not in the center of our own story. That is why we ask questions that have nothing to do with the reality of our historical ancestral lineage. For example, if you ask an African person to start with anything in terms of knowledge and history and culture, they normally will give you the European answer, that the Greeks started everything. Well, we know that the Greeks were very young in human history. If you start with 800 BC, the period of Homer and the Odyssey and the Iliad, then you're forgetting that 2,000 years before Homer, African people built the pyramids. Then you are starting with a limited understanding of human history. If you forget geometry, if you forget philosophy, if you forget architecture, if you forget theology, if you forget politics, all of these fields that were started in Africa along the Nile Valley, with the Nile Valley civilizations, long before they were ever in Greece, how do you account for people being sane. You can't be sane if you believe that, because in effect what you're doing is believing something that is false. And if you follow that false track, then what happens is that you're miseducated. That is why Carter G. Woodson in 1933 wrote a book called The Miseducation of the Negro, because he understood precisely what we understand as Afrocentric educators. And I've educated, I've worked with school districts, many school districts all across the country. And I still work in school districts in trying to teach teachers how to teach African American children. And you teach African American children like you teach any children normally, and that is you start from where they are. You start with their own history, their own culture. If you go to Japan and you start talking about mathematics in Japan, you start with Japanese students and their history and mathematics. If you start talking with them about history, you start with them with their own history. But with African Americans, we are the only people, I think, where the educational experience doesn't begin with us. Our educational experience, whatever it is, if we talk about literature, it normally doesn't start with the African literary experience. So we've got to come back to that, and that's why it's important to have Afrocentric education, because we change the narrative, we change the story, we make the African person the center of his or her own story. If we don't do that, we continue to teach what I believe to be a history, a understanding of information, knowledge, and that really puts African people on the outside of their own story. And that is, to me, a very destructive force in American society. And that's why I've always called for a recentering of information. If you talk to me about the Constitutional Convention, I want to know, what did the black people think who were serving in the kitchen when Thomas Jefferson was in that room? What did they say about Mr. Jefferson? What did they overhear? If I want to know the black people who built the White House and the U.S. Capitol building with their labor, I want to know what conversations you imagine they had when they were doing this. I mean, there are other stories. I want to know the story of York when you tell me about Lewis and Clark. I want to know what did York say? What was he thinking? And we have some of this information in the diaries that have been written. And it's extremely important that we never forget that Afrocentric education is fundamental for us to have a true multicultural education. If we don't have Afrocentric education, then all we do is to repeat white education.
Take a few minutes to finish your 7 thoughts or more. You got more than 7.
What about or less?
Right?
Yeah, I got 4.
What are we doing now? That was his name, Asante? Alefi Kete?
Yeah.
Thoughts about what we heard, what things were stated, what thoughts came to your mind, whether it had to get down. Okay, that's all right.
Okay, a little snippet of this. Still continue to write. Oh, gotta warn you. There's a trigger alert. I apologize for the person that is speaking. Just hear him, and we'll talk about who it is, if you like, later.
Now, are we supposed to make 7 things on this too?
You just continue your list.
Oh.
I'm only gonna play about 5 minutes of this, so not long.
Black history, lost, stolen, or strayed.
You're the kind of No, I could never fit in that. Never get in that at all. This is more like it. Now, what's the whitest thing you know? Whiter than the German snow, better than the whites of your eyes? Sugar. Non-integrated, non-black, sweet sugar. But you see, there is a black man in your sugar. His name is Norbert Rillier. Norbert Rillier in 1846 invented a vacuum pan, revolutionized the sugar refining industry. Now, you have to dig to find that fact. I mean, it's not much history, but it's still history. Now, what do you stand in? In your shoes. Now, there's just you and your shoes, isn't it? Nope. See, there's a black man standing in your Oxfords with you. Sharing your soul and your heel is a man, his name is Jan Ernst Metzeler. And in 1863, this is known by the kids, Metzeler invented the machine that made mass-produced shoes possible. Now you have to dig around for that fact, too. And again, it's not much history, but it's history. Am I coming in clear to California? I mean, is this TV signal driving through past the Sierra Nevada mountains and slipping into San Francisco? Okay, well, I want to thank you, Jim Beckworth. Jim Beckworth, out of St. Louis, hunter, trapper, and honorary chief of the Crow tribe of Indians. We had trouble finding you, Jim. Though you helped open the West, you didn't make the books. Chicago, right here, where the Wrigley Building is. Young fellow by the name of Jean-Baptiste de Sable. Jean Baptiste, he founded you, Chicago, when he traded with the Indians. And of course, there it is right at that particular time. It was called Chicago, or Stinking Onion, by the Indians. And de Sable, he didn't even change the name at all. Now you take the Lewis and Clark expedition here, right in there. You'll find a black man named York, helping to open the West. Those men are trying to wash the black out of York. That's what you might call historically significant, because a lot of people think we ought to wash white, but we ain't gonna, you see. Texas, coming to you, Texas, right down the Chisholm Trail, right here. Right down there with 5,000 black cowboys who never made it to the Hollywood Western. Did you know that? Huh? In the same group, there was one black outlaw. His name was Deadwood Dick, who claimed his soul brothers were Bat Masterson, Billy the Kid, and Jesse James. Deadwood Dick used to ride into the saloon, order 2 drinks, one for himself and one for his horse. And here's his horse, drinking a shot of red-eye with a straw. And how about the 186,000 blacks who fought on the Union side during the Civil War? 38,000 died. How about Teddy Roosevelt's charge up San Juan Hill? It wasn't just the Rough Riders who made it. 4 black regiments went right up with Teddy. They didn't get lost going up the hill. They got lost in the history books. How about the North Pole? Snow White? Well, the first man there was black, Matthew Henson. He spoke Eskimo. And he was Admiral Perry's navigator. And although he made it first to the pole, it never quite made it to the history books. And how about your heart? Can we get there? All right. Daniel Hale Williams first performed open heart surgery successfully. Now, this list could go on forever. Blacks who made it, blacks who made history, but who didn't get into the history text at all. And the strange thing is how little there is about us in the textbooks. Napoleon once said history is a fable agreed upon, and the fable agreed upon up to now is that American history is white on white. But sometimes we did get into the history books. All wrong. Now you take this one. The Growth of the American Republic, 1942 edition. Samuel Eliot Morrison, Henry Steele Commager. Quote, as for. This has to do with slavery. As for Sambo, Professor Morrison. Sambo, Professor Commager. As for Sambo, whose wrongs moved the abolitionists to wrath and tears, there is some reason to believe that he suffered less than any other class in the South from its peculiar institution. Peculiar institution means slavery. Although brought to America by force, the incurably optimistic Negro soon became attached to the country and devoted to his white folks. Unquote. Those lines were written by two Pulitzer Prize winning white Northern professors. Slavery. That's the place everybody likes to start Negro history. You have ignorant black men being brought over from Africa in chains. Terrible thing, slavery. But this way slavery is taught, it sort of takes the sting out of it. Because the way it's usually taught, people think that we Afro-Americans started with nothing but little grass skirts like the kids in the Tarzan movies. And though America gave us slavery, America kindly gave us religion and a lick or two of education. And when we get more jobs and more education, then up from slavery. But we had something before we left Africa, something more than rhythm. We had a high culture. The culture was so high that great artists in the world are still borrowing from it. Now here's a sculpture by an unknown African artist. And here's what Paul Klee took from him. And here's a work by an unknown black African. And Pablo Picasso liked what he saw. Another African design, and Modigliani swiped it. Or he was influenced by it, or whatever polite word you want to use. Another black African artist, and Picasso didn't change it very much. I mean, when you look at this copy, you gotta give us a little more than rhythm. You gotta give us style. Now, if you tell the history of slavery right, you got a big problem on your hands. The slave trader didn't take some savage out of Africa. He took a human being, sold him like an animal, and separated him from his family. America invented the cruelest slavery in the history of the world because it broke up black families. After slavery was over, America kept breaking up the black man's family. And that's some awful history to teach. Now, if you want to look history right straight in the eye, you're going to get a black eye. Because it isn't important whether a few black heroes got lost or stolen or strayed in America's history textbooks. What's important is why they got left out. Now, this country has got a psychological history. There was a master race, there was a slave race. And though there isn't any political slavery anymore, those same old attitudes have hung around. I mean, the burning part of Burn, Baby Burn is right here in this classroom. We want to thank Mrs. Lovely Phillips and the whole gang here at 4th Street for the brilliant and intelligent artwork that they've done here.
That's a good place to pause and share out. Yeah, we got some young men here.
Any seat is
That's
in.
her grandson.
Okay, come on, have a seat.
Here's one here.
He said, good morning.
Here's one here.
David. It's one for you. It's
One
one
over
for
here,
you.
sir. Oh, I'll be back. What do you guys think? Talk about what we just saw, and let's share out, and let's try to unpack it if we can. Would you like to start, Mr. Dixon?
What am I talking about?
What'd you write down and why?
Oh, I wrote down, listening to the history of the brother Sante. I was picking up information about the slave trade. I read that before about 1619, that most of the people that came over were not slaves, they were indentured servants. And usually they were indentured servants for a period of 7 years, and they were freed. So there had been black people in the States long before the slaves started. So I picked that up. I know we have been dislocated, and now we're all in a state of confusion because we're trying to figure out who we are. This is why we're in this class now. So we'll have can pick up a sense of purpose. Everybody needs to have a place that they can call home. And right now we're not at home. We are here trying to find out who we are. Educational system as most of us know, has been geared towards the white folks. You know, their sense of education has been European. Pick that up. I am a Greek, but I didn't know that 2,000 years before the Greeks even began to have their own ideas. There were other people on the earth, which happened to be black people, that had their education. So I didn't know that. I'm reading Carter G. Woodson now. I read half of it, and I have to keep going back because I can't get forward without rereading it, because information pops in my mind, and from what he's saying, I understand what he's going through. The more education a black man gets, the less inclined he is to help himself, because he's been taught by the Europeans, and so that's why I keep reading Carter G. Woodson over and over again. I picked up on a lot of our black heroes. Some I did not know, some I did know. So I wrote those down so I can understand those. I may have to go back and read those and find out who they really are and how they got into the history books and how they did not get into the history books. So this is what I wrote down.
It's beautiful. Anybody know how we got the system of slavery we got now? If people came over as indentured servants, which, still slavery, but how do we get the system of racialized slavery today? Why was that?
Well, it became easier to keep the indentured servants on longer, and what they did, because of the penal system, they would create a penal system that would have you incarcerated. Back in those days, you weren't incarcerated. You were kept longer in indentured to. And then once they realized that they could do that, they started to say, well, yeah, we got people on the other side of the earth that we can bring over. Let's get those people over here. And then because of the crops they were growing, cotton and tobacco, they needed more help. And now here's what happened. Now I'm just talking now because I'm on the road now. They tried to enslave the Indians. The Indians were so against slavery that they would rather kill themselves than to become slaves. So you couldn't enslave the Indians because they would not become slaves. So some of the indentured servants that were black, because what they're saying is because of their attitudes, they were less inclined to be more antagonistic. So they started to look at this particular race that could become slaves. They weren't slaves at the time. They were workers, because they needed people to work the fields. And the cotton and tobacco fields were hard to work. So they needed people that could work that. They thought that the black person, because of his skin, could stay in the sun longer. And that's how they started, and then become institution. And the Dutch and the English. Well, the English got in last. The Dutch and the Portuguese, they started to figure out, well, there's a way to make money. Let's try to figure this out. And they started going to Africa, and they had trade with some of the African chiefs. Now this is where we go back to that some of the black people had slaves. They started going to the African chiefs, which at the time of war, anyone that was captured became a slave of the tribe. So they went to African chiefs and asked them, or talked to them about, you got these people that are captured, let us have them. They bartered for those, and then they started becoming slaves, and that's how they are countries or in Africa that have not been slaves all their lives, but if they captured somebody, they've sold them into slavery, and that's how it started to become more of an institution and it became a money maker. So
Let me respond to this real quick. Greed changed the world. That's just hands down. The Bible even speaks of it. The love of money is the root of all evil. So we can source anything back to greed, to that, being sort of the sin of the earth. So what changed the world, the entire world, was what? This is one thing that we talked about in the news this week because of what happened. It's gun. The gun revolutionized the world. That's how you can conquer China. That's how you can conquer Japan. Old, maritime societies. In fact, the emperor was below the samurais in Japan, for instance. But once you got the gun, then these are trained warriors. That's all they do. From the moment they breathe, they just train to be warriors. You give them a gun, sort of upsets the balance. You go into places like Africa with thousands of years of established culture, established, civilization. And how do you break them apart? Now you ain't got to have hand-to-hand combat. It's the gun that changed the world. So when they were, so yes, it's tribal in many ways, where you win your battle against tribe, for whatever reason. Human history has had conflict, even with, Cain and Abel. When they won, so to speak, you come into our tribe more so than you're our slave. Yes, you're a slave just for a certain amount of time. And then if you had kids within that context, they didn't become slaves. They became part of the society and what you got. And then that repeats itself when there's another conflict. But how do you make conflicts easier? You say, hey, here's a gun for you. Now you can go conquer them. So instead of bringing them to the society, conquer them, and then the Europeans found value in this human cargo, these human captives, and sent them over there. But what started when we came over from 1619 as indentured servants, that means you're contractually a slave. At the end of it, you purchased your freedom. You can go. The simplest answer is it was easier. You said it. It was easier because some of those folks on the other side of the ocean say, I'll be your indentured servant, the white folks. I'll be your indentured servant for 7 years. So when we get over there, you come over there and you run away. And how do you know a free white from an indentured white? You don't. How do you know a free black from a slave black? You don't. But you know if all blacks were slaves, it'll make it easier. So that was a simple answer. Jabu, and your sister.
And that's a good segue. As a man thinketh, so he is in his heart, so is he. So your behavior is based on what you think. And so the white folks psychologically started thinking that they were better than everybody. And so they started thinking that, and they said, okay, we've got to impress this, we've got to impose this on everybody else to accept this. And if they don't accept it, then yeah, we'll kill them. Right. And so even if you talk about the gun, what makes the gun so psychologically powerful is because most of us will say, if a person has got a gun, I ain't gonna fight them because I can't win that fight. So it's not the gun.
The mentality behind it.
It's your psychology. It's your thinking. See, and y'all know I'm a Vietnam veteran. I don't know if y'all know that or not. But I saw Vietnamese take a bottle with some gasoline and a rag and run out and throw it on tanks and take them out because they would burn up the cat that was driving. Now, that's a different type of thinking than what we're aware of. And they won the war. Because they said, I don't, look, you ain't coming over here enslaving me. We gonna fight with what we got and we gonna win. And they teach you you can't enslave or control someone that don't agree to be enslaved and controlled. And so they took education, and this is the reason why we got to start teaching ourselves. They took the educational process, Charlie Brown.
Right. You can be king.
Oh, and Charlie Brown's a white boy. And we bought into that. Our kids, well, Charlie Brown could be king, but I can't.
And the black boy on Charlie Brown is dirty.
Yes. So that is the reason why this class is so important, because we got to change our thinking. And they left us out, which a comedian, Bill Cosby, was sharing. They left us out because they didn't want us to know that we actually an accomplishment was superior. And they wanted us to not know that we'd done anything, and anything that was done by the white boy. And so that allowed them to psychologically say that we're superior to everybody and make everybody buy into it.
Well, I caution about the word superior. Now, from my perspective, I would say equal, at the most equal. You know, as a
they wasn't talking about equal.
I know they weren't talking about equal.
That's what I'm talking about.
But I'm saying, if there's a superior, inferior, then that sort of justifies the way of thinking.
No, I'm talking about accomplishments.
Accomplishments. Okay,
I'm not talking about you been born just because you was born white or just because you was born black. That you're superior. Yeah, there's definitely inequality there. But when you start looking at what you have accomplished, you're more accomplished than these children.
But I'm not better than the children.
No, you better not be. But you can be more accomplished.
Right.
She is. What's your background, sis? What's your?
A physician.
She's a physician. She's more accomplished than me being in medicine, and I'm an electrical engineer. She better not come over here trying to do electrical engineering, and Lord knows I don't want to be pumping on nobody's heart.
There's a poem called "White Man's Burden."
If I can finish this,
right.
I'm saying that in your accomplishments,
right,
there can be a question of superiority and inferiority. And they tried to eliminate our accomplishments so that they could say we are superior. And they took it to birth. They took it up and beyond accomplishment. They took it to birth. They said just because I was born white, I'm at the top of the totem pole. And that's the reason why we have got to start teaching. Malefi, he talked about, I wrote down our story as opposed to history, his story. We've got to start telling our story. With what did he say? The person, history is the fable on which everybody agrees. Right. Well, we got to start agreeing on our fable, and we got to start telling our story from our perspective to our people. To whereas that we, don't teach superiority as far as being born black, you superior to nobody, but your accomplishments, and if you understand what we've done, we the baddest thing that ever walked the face of the earth. Amen.
And I don't disagree at all. I'm going to tell you what they are teaching in school. There's a poem by Rudyard Kipling called "White Man's Burden." Mm-hmm. Right? And we celebrate Rudyard Kipling. He wrote, especially the Greek culture, the fraternity culture. They read his poem, as part of their rites of passage. But he also wrote another poem called "The White Man's Burden." where he was like, it's the burden of the superior race, I'm paraphrasing his poem, to help those that are lesser. And then when we help, they hate us for it. You try to make them better, and they turn around and hate us. You know, read that poem. And that was on the test of this class in the school that I'm teaching in right now. And it infuriates me because that's, you know, out of context, you know, introduce it. It's fine. It's part of literature, part of history. I'm all for that. But if there's no proper context, and there's no frame of work, and they never discussed it during the unit study. It was just on the test. They said, "What does this mean? White folks is better than me, and I shouldn't hate you for you trying to make me better."
Is that the answer that they expected to get?
I don't know what he expected. But I am meeting with him. I'm meeting with him tomorrow for dinner to express my concerns.
Yeah.
You had your hand up, man.
Yeah. Well, I just had a comment and a question, I guess, because you were talking about you know, what started slavery. And I was just wondering, so indentured servants, you know, there's a finite amount of time that they are indentured, right?
Yes.
So I'm wondering the economics also of slavery, because this is free labor now, and it's forever, as long as I can keep these folks enslaved. Because one of the thoughts I wrote down is, you know, the building of this country would not be possible to the extent, and the wealth of this country would not be possible without the amount of free labor that allowed this to occur. So was that part of the switch from indentured servitude to let's just enslave these people because we don't
Not
want
necessarily.
them?
There's
Okay.
always been free labor.
Okay.
You know, when you think about how Europe went into Africa around the 13th and 14th century, they went in there after what? Well, what happened in the 13th and 14th century in Europe?
The Crusades? No?
Where 2/3 of them died. 2/3 of Europeans. Now, from the noble, the plague.
Like,
The plague happened. So a lot of white folks was dead. Some of the people that was working the fields, all the way to the noblemen, were dead. So they had, no, you know, the entire continent, you know, the western, you know, the parts they call the western, was devastated. So they got curious. They're a curious bunch. Started going into different parts, trying to find new ways of life. Right? There's always been free labor. You know, there's always been greed. There's always been a caste system, so to speak. I think the switch happened with this new sort of idea of freedom that perpetuated slavery. Because, especially the racial component of slavery. Because when you got a racial component of slavery, you can say that we don't, you know, people in here eat beef. We don't care if a cow is, even people that don't eat beef. We probably don't care if a cow gets slaughtered every single day. Millions upon millions of cows, who cares? They're necessary because people like their meat. People like their barbecue. We don't care if a pig is slaughtered. When you can reduce a person down to equivalent to something that doesn't matter, like a pig or a cattle, then it won't matter if they're dead. Because everybody in this room feels that they are in some ways better, you know, supported even by the Bible. We're better than fish. We're better. We ain't better than dogs, obviously, Michael Vick. But we're better than animals, right? There's a hierarchy into the way this world is set up. And at the top, they convinced them that it's white people and we got to take care of everybody else. And that's been perpetuated every day. We're the world's police. We spend more on the military than we spend anything else. Budget was just enacted. $130 billion for the military. 113 for everything else. So it's like, I think it's always been that way. What perpetuated was the idea that I am free and I'm deserving of everything I got. Because, you know, in Europe, everybody wasn't free. Whites look like you. There was a hierarchy. And there's still a hierarchy between poor and rich this time, but you're born into the the lowest, that's all you are. You're born here, that's all you are. You're born noble, right? Nobody can be the king when they used to be a pauper. You got your hand up now.
No, I'm telling him I'm taking my picture.
I don't think he's taking it as part of this, is he? But I can tell him that.
All right.
All right. Welcome.
But that was the goal of the society, is to make us appear subhuman.
Correct.
So
To
that way
justify.
that they could justify
Right.
treating us
Right.
worse than a dog,
Correct.
because the dog is their best friend.
Correct.
And then they can use us to work and get the economics off of it and say, well, they don't live well because they're subhuman. They
Right.
look at them. You know, we was born this way, and that's the reason. And then they teach that.
And they teach it in
And we
they
gotta
teach in
quit.
alternative ways. Because if I came in here and put some dog meat on here, y'all be like, ugh, how are you gonna get rid of a dog? But if I come in here with some pork chops, people are like, man, that smells good. That's barbecue. What's the difference in the animal?
I wouldn't either, but
I wouldn't.
most people would. I know what you
But
got
you know what I
your
mean?
point.
I mean,
Yeah.
there's barbecues every summer.
Exactly.
That's saved.
Roasting.
Right. Man, you have a dog there, you have Fido going across there, you're grossed out. What's the difference?
None.
So they teaching you that, they protect certain animals. I couldn't slap a horse right here without a permit. You can eat horse meat,
Not in this country.
but I need you can eat horse meat in this country.
No, I said in this
You have to have
country,
a
you can't slap it. but
right.
other
You have to have a
countries,
permit. You got to have the history. You got to have the history of the horse in order to say where'd you get this horse that it can be here. Maybe it's an old race horse that died, which would be some tough, muscular meat. What's the history of this horse? But we don't even know the history of ourselves. So you're right, Reverend Ajabu, that this class, these discussions are quite important, because if you don't know yourself, young man, how are you going to know your future? And if you don't know yourself, I guarantee I do know your future. Right. So I'm going to have one more person for homework. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to come back and continue this conversation. We're going to have more materials for you to share. So we get back into that book starting next week.